to backtrack here for a little bit and once again bring up the topic of pirates. And for those of you who are wondering, provided that any of you actually saw my last two videos, the Dr. Seuss video is coming, but I just want to give you something in the meantime while I work on it. I also wanted to apologize for the fact that some of the scrolling effects on my last two videos have had glitches and therefore have not been readable. Okay, so while I was reading Under the Black Flag, a book on pirates by David Cordingly, I came across a passage that made me realize that the character of Captain Hook may actually have been based on a real historical figure. And in this video, I'm going to explain how it is I came to that conclusion. J.M. Barrie, the man who wrote Peter Pan, always intended that the character of Captain Hook be portrayed as a well-educated and fairly refined person, a notion that seems to have been overlooked in later adaptations. While speaking to the students at Eton College, Barrie even went so far as to state that Hook had received his education at Eton College in Balliol. We also know that Hook probably started his piratical career sometime during the early 18th century, because we are told that he was the boatswain or boatswain to none other than Blackbeard, who died November 1718. Now these facts actually make my job a lot easier because anyone who knows anything about 18th century pirates can tell you that so-called aristocratic pirates were very few and far between. Most of the pirates during this era were undereducated sailors who went to sea in an attempt to support themselves. While this was the norm as far as pirates were concerned during the early 18th century, there was in fact one individual who subverted this trope, a man by the name of Major Stede Bonnet. Unlike the majority of pirates from this era, Stede Bonnet was a wealthy landowner from Barbados with a liberal education who turned to a life of piracy mainly because he was bored. Yep, one day he decided to buy a boat, commission a crew, and went pirating. While it's obvious that both Captain Hook and Stede Bonnet were what you might call aristocratic pirates, the connection between these two actually goes much deeper. Remember earlier how I mentioned that Captain Hook served as boatswain on Blackbeard's ship? Well, it turns out that Bonnet was also well acquainted with Blackbeard. You see, after leaving Barbados, Bonnet eventually found himself on the island of New Providence, in the Bahamas, which had become a kind of pirate haven. It was here that he met Blackbeard, and the two entered into a kind of joint venture. Bonnet and his crew tagged along with Blackbeard for a while, until it became apparent that Blackbeard's new partner in fact knew very little about sailing, and even less about commanding a pirate crew. With no other recourse, Blackbeard effectively relieved Captain Bonnet of his command, putting a member of his own crew in charge of his sloop. After this, a report from the Boston Newsletter, issued November 11, 1717, reported that Bonnet had been seen on board Blackbeard's ship and that he had no command, as he instead walked around the deck in his morning gown, before retiring to his books, of which he had a good library on board. My last bit of evidence for this theory comes from J.M. Barrie himself, as he openly admitted that he drew inspiration from other sources when developing his characters. One of the sources that Barrie is supposed to have drawn inspiration from was Captain Charles Johnson's book, A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates. Since its first publication in 1724, Captain Charles Johnson's book has become one of the go-to sources on piratical history. So of course, Stede Bonnet, the only aristocratic pirate of his time, has his own chapter. This of course means that Barrie would have been well aware of Bonnet's story and could have easily incorporated elements of it into Captain Hook's character. Okay, so I will admit that there are a few problems with this theory, like the fact that I have no idea what college Stede Bonnet attended, let alone if he received his degree from the same place as Captain Hook. Also, while Stede Bonnet certainly knew Blackbeard, he definitely never served as his boatswain, though I think it's funny that both Stede Bonnet and Captain Hook were apparently very bad at their job, as Barrie tells us that Captain Hook was one of the worst boatswains to ever serve aboard Blackbeard's ship. However, despite these minor differences, I still think that the character of Captain Hook was at least partially based on Stede Bonnet, being that their stories still have far too much overlap for the whole thing to be a coincidence. Well, what do you think? Was the character of Captain Hook based on Stede Bonnet, or am I completely off base? Leave your responses in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.